Trade schools are amazing and they're worth the time to go to, but they don't tend to teach this particular thing. Granted, it's much less of a big deal until you get into the larger industrial chiller side of the world, but it is still a very important piece of the piping system that you need to know about. You need to know exists and what to call it. And you can see it here behind me as a two-phase line. Hi, how you doing? I'm Holden Schamberger. I'm with HVAC Time and Chiller Academy. I specialize in chiller systems. We're going to be talking about that today. And this particular video is from Chiller Academy in the Introduction to Chillers course. It is under the Terms module and is referred to as two-phase line. So I just wanted to share it with you this week, let you see this is an important part of the system I think you should know about. I'll explain everything here in the lesson.
We're very heavily trained on the three refrigerant lines. You have your suction, your discharge, and your liquid. And we also have the four major components: your compressor, your condenser, metering device, and evaporator. But there's a fourth line that doesn't really get discussed as much, isn't something that the schools cover in the same way. And it's largely because, especially on smaller systems, it's such a small piece of the system that it's usually just not worried about. It's not paid any attention to, but it's actually a very critical and useful part, especially as this scales into the much larger side with a chiller system. The fourth line I'm referring to is our two-phase line. And this was a line that I didn't have defined for me for a long time, and so I didn't really know what to call it, but we very heavily use it in the trade, and especially in the chiller realm. So in a split system, it's a very small piece of pipe. Many times we come straight out of the metering device, straight into our distributor, which then we feed out into our feed tubes, distribution tubes. So the official two-phase part of this is right there at the coupling of the metering device where it sweats into the distributor, which there's so much metal there, it's really not the most accurate thing in the world to take a reading from. But technically, right there is our two-phase. Now, you scale this into much larger systems that we deal with in chillers, and you'll find that there's a few feet in some cases. Some get into several feet, but most of them are just a couple of feet of a pipe between our metering device and our evaporator. And that is our two-phase. Now, it's called a two-phase because, well, what happens with a metering device? We get our 80% and our 20% flash at the point of passing through. It's the whole point of the pressure drop sequence, and we flash off as part of the expansion process whenever we go from that high pressure to low pressure state. Now, with some chillers, with economizers, we intentionally remove that flash gas, and we'll talk about those things in later lessons. But just like the other lines in the system, that is where the two-phase term comes in. And it's an extremely useful and effective section of pipe to be able to utilize. So there are a lot of chillers out there that utilize that two-phase portion of the system as it, like its transducers, for example. One of the things about that two-phase line, it is the literal saturation temperature. So you could take a pressure gauge on your suction line and take that saturation, then take a pipe temperature of that two-phase side of your system, and you're going to find that that two-phase pipe, if it's actual pipe, you're not going through a whole bunch of metal and couplings, and what your pressure gauge told you your saturation was, are extremely close, if not identical. That's because that is reading, it isn't a literal saturation reading. And this is true across any system. So if you do have a split or an RTU where there is just a very short piece of pipe between say the TXV and the distributor, you can get a reading there that you can trust, you'll get the actual saturation. And if memory serves, I think there's even like the Train IntelliPack actually uses that pipe, and it has a temp sensor there as part of its monitoring the saturation temperature in the system. And if it starts to see a low saturation, and the system doesn't have a transducer that is monitoring a physical pressure with. So we use that same theory in the chiller. There will be a temp sensor. They're typically in a wet well, meaning that they're exposed to the refrigerant, or it's also known as an active well, but not all of them are. Some of them are in dry wells or non active wells, where the sensor is just sitting inside of a tubular housing that's in the refrigerant stream, and it's getting its temperature that way instead of making literal contact. But to give some examples, an RTAA used the actual two-phase line for saturation. There was no pressure transducer, but when you walk up to the panel, you see a suction pressure and a saturation temperature. Well, that particular chiller was reversing or reverse PT charting the pressure out of it. So the the temperature, it was reading the physical temperature and then converting a pressure out of that temperature, whereas we're used to doing it the other way around. And it measured the condenser the same way. There was a temp sensor up in the condenser where the saturation temperature would be consistent. So it's about a third of the way down the coil. And that's how we got our high pressure reading for that chiller. So from a troubleshooting perspective, it's great to use because you can just put a clamp right there and you've got your saturation temperature. And then you can compare that to your other sensors in the system, or maybe let's say you're having a panel display issue, or you're trying to do a sensor verification while it's running. There's so many applications where if you're not confident with, say, where your saturation is on the chiller, you need to do some checking and you want to get that data, you can put a pipe clamp on that two-phase line and get a lot of critical information that's going to help you without having to hook up a pressure gauge or do anything else that's going to influence the system. And I feel comfortable saying it's a non-invasive way of testing a transducer. If the transducer is, if you're concerned it could be reading bad, but you look at the panel and you've got a reading there, well, if for whatever reason you don't want to hook up a gauge and take any risks of introducing something, whatever your circumstances are, you can use that line. And whatever pressure and saturation that panel says, it should match up to what the two-phase line says the saturation is through a physical reading with a temperature clamp that you trust, you know is calibrated. And if they don't match, well, it's effective enough. You could condemn that transducer and do it with a level of known accuracy. When you're first hearing about this term and this concept, it's a little weird, and it's not something that we learn. We think we've kind of got all the pieces together of the refrigeration circuit by the time we get to this side of it. And that's this particular one, just due to, I think it's mostly due to scale, just sometimes gets missed. But it's a very important one to know, and it's one you're going to be dealing with and troubleshooting a lot as you're going through your chiller career.
If you'd like to see the written summary on this, where I've got some extra graphics and things, that is in the course. So in the course, you get the video, you get an audio version, plus you get the written description with pictures and things. And part of the thought there is I want to give you plenty of ways to be able to consume this information, and something that is, say you're in a spot with really low cell service. Well, you have the ability to easily access it even with a low signal by having these lower mediums where it's really easy to load text It's really easy to load a MP3 audio file. So if you needed to hear the explanation if you're on site, all that's there for you. Anyway, love to see you in the academy. Come join the Chiller community group in there for some mentorship, guidance, whatever it is you need. With that, MTT, make the time for your family, for your spouse, for your kids. I'll see you around.